Hi! This time I wanted to continue this video series where I talk about solo adventurers. These videos are supposed to serve as inspiration when you are playing a solo role playing game or when you are playing with a single player that is a one game master, one player character, and you want to control a single player character. That is, you could also play a one on one experience or a solo experience controlling several player characters. But it's very fascinating to see how a single character, a single survivor, can go through all of those dangerous situations and coming out on top, surviving all of those ordeals. This time I am going to talk about Cugel the Clever from the Dying Earth. Well, he appears in two of the Dying Earth stories, the longest ones, but the Tales of the Dying Earth, they have more situations to them, more characters, and I will mention some of those situations briefly as I go through the different adventures and misadventures of Cugel. If you haven't seen the other my other video where I talk about Conan, please check out the playlist in the description below. Cugel is very different when it comes to when we compare him to Conan the Barbarian or Conan the King, the Thief, the Conqueror. He has so many titles to him, but Cugel the Clever, that's his most well-known title. He takes a very different approach when it comes to going through all of those dangerous situations. There are going to be some spoilers as I talk about the different methods and the personality of Cugel, so please keep that in mind. If you haven't read The Dying Earth, consider reading that book first. The Tales from the Dying Earth collection or compilation is perfect. But I won't be spoiling too many things either. If you want to read The Dying Earth later on and you watch this video, I don't think that it will spoil too many things about it. When we first get introduced to Cugel, we are immediately hit with a good idea on what sort of person Cugel is. He starts out robbing a grave, desecrating a tomb. He basically opens up this sort of casket or sarcophagus and starts to throw around the bones of the cadaver, of the corpse, and he keeps, well, what is left of it, and he's keeping all of the things that look valuable to sell them later on. He is even planning to paint some symbols on those, like jewelry or any sort of belonging that was kept inside of that sarcophagus, to make it appear as if they are extra magical. He was going to sell them as magical amulets, or rather charms or talismans rather. So you immediately see that Cugel, when it comes to the strength of Cugel, when surviving different situations, he basically has no sort of attachment restriction, no morals. In some situations, there could be, well, it's very difficult to tell. I will say that at certain points, Cugel slightly sticks to a certain code of thieves, but very mildly. You could also say that he only undertakes certain attitudes in very specific situations when it's to his own advantage. Because for those of you that do not know about The Dying Earth, it's a science fantasy setting where, not in all of the stories, but in the majority of the tales, everyone in The Dying Earth is a horrible person. And here is where I, throughout the years, came to respect Cugel a bit more. Because when you start to see how Cugel is just so, he almost looks like a sociopath. He is willing and ready to betray, backstab, deceive, gaslight everyone and anyone around him. He looks like such a horrible person. But when I first read The Dying Earth, and I read it as some sort of dark comedy, because you get some laughs, but at the same time you become amazed or astonished as to the things that Cugel is willing to do, I started to think later on, that is some weeks or months after finishing the book, many years back, I started to think, well, everyone in the earth, in the dying earth, is doing the same thing as Cugel. So Cugel, he's trying to survive. It is somewhat difficult to tell or to know how Cugel would react in a world that was a bit more virtuous. But because in the dying earth, everyone is just doing their own thing, backstabbing everyone, tricking everyone, you can see the reasons as to why Cugel acts like that. Now he makes a very interesting contrast when it comes to when we compare him to Conan the Barbarian. At first glance, they are completely opposite. Conan is a strategist and a tactician, but at the same time, he takes advantage of his incredible fitness. He's so strong, so sturdy, so fast. He's simply unmatched when it comes to measuring his own physical capabilities to any character in the stories of Conan. But when it comes to Cugel, although he is decent in fights, in the fights that he participates in, he wins the battles. I think Cugel many times underestimates his own potential as a combatant because, like I said, in those fights, he eliminates his opponents or he neutralizes them, incapacitates them, and in some very dangerous moments, you could say that the strength of Cugel is also that he is very lucky. Sometimes he comes upon this, let's say, a particular magical item that rescues him from getting killed against very powerful opponents. But for the most part, the true strength of Cugel is his ability to deceive. He's almost a perfect con artist. Not the best con artist. He also gets tricked every now and then. But so you could say that he uses his mind differently from Conan. Conan, like I said, he's very much on the strategic or tactical side of the situation, but he is also trying to push or lead the situation towards where he excels, which is combat. Conan is quite aggressive even in his mindset. He's always trying to destroy the enemy completely, to crush your enemies, the typical. But when it comes to Cugel, it looks like Cugel is always looking at his opponents or his adversaries as a potential resource. He's always thinking about how to manipulate or use others. And he displays certain mastery when it comes to different deceitful and treacherous techniques. Because, for example, it's very common to see, like sociopaths or manipulators that try to just mess around with people's minds. But here's the important thing, and this is where Cugel excels. When it comes to his methods of manipulation, Cugel pinpoints what method is going to work on a particular person or individual or a group of people. For example, if Cugel sees a bunch of religious people, and this actually happens in the Dying Earth, he immediately knows that he can manipulate or use those people, playing around with those hypnotic suggestions placed on them by dogma and doctrine, that is, using their blind faith, not a true spirituality or faith. He takes the dogma and doctrine, or rather the mind shackles placed over those people through dogma and doctrine, and he can pretty much move an entire group towards his own objectives, his own needs. He pretty much gets a big group of people, a lot of people killed, as he's using them as some sort of protection or support. He needed to travel to this area that was very dangerous, and he is able to manipulate all of those people, playing around with their devotion, again, like I said, it's supporting himself on that dogma and doctrine, and he gets them all killed, and he uses them as human shields. So he knows what method he needs to use with different people. And for example, when it comes to gaslighting, when a character is not very certain or very sure about something that has happened, or something that they have said, or something that someone else has said, Cugel, it's kind of like he pinpoints that weakness. Some people do not know do not know this, but and I think this is a useful tip if you are not aware of it. But in order to gaslight someone, that person needs to be groomed into being gaslighted. So you see all of these horrible cases. In fact, in role playing games, there are some. Well, I would say that there is a particular case of a very awful, very evil individual who gaslighted his girlfriend. But here's the thing, that girlfriend, that is in the RPG industry, that girlfriend wouldn't have been gaslighted if she was not treated like that at home. So you can see that in the case of the Dying Earth, Cugel immediately identifies those individuals as vulnerable. So this individual, his weakness is religion. This one, greed is his or her weakness. And he, like a predator, like a shark, he pinpoints that and attacks that person. And like I said, unlike others that try to gaslight people that were not groomed for that and they fail miserably, Cugel displays great mastery in those insidious methods. And like I said, a lot of people could look at Cugel and you would say, wow, Cugel is pretty much a villain. But when you start to really look into things, everyone in the Dying Earth is trying to do the same to him. So it's always a sort of battle, always a sort of duel. And you could think that it's perhaps tiring for Cugel to be constantly engaged in those fights, but it really. Cugel gives the impression that he is very much in harmony or in tranquility with that approach. For Cugel, every day that he is getting deceived, or he's trying to deceive someone, it's like almost as natural as breathing for him, because that's the way things work in the Dying Earth. I think that's part of the strength in Cugel, and that's something that he shares with Conan the Barbarian. They are, yes, like I said, they have this almost like a Zen approach, this tranquility or balance when it comes to dealing with all sorts of difficult emotional situations. For example, Cugel sometimes gets romantically involved with some women. I don't know if romance is the right term. It looks more like temporary allies with benefits sort of situation. But if something happens to that girlfriend at that time, he just moves on as if nothing had happened. And that's where you think, wow, is Cugel either very strong emotionally, or is he a complete psychopath that has no empathy, no attachment? Very difficult to tell. And that's something that I think Cugel shares with some villains in other media. Like, for example, back when the Fantastic Four were really heroes, not when they are represented as satanics. I'll see if the video is still up, but there is a video where it clearly shows that you know how some people sometimes say thank you or grace or whatever for the meal, for the food that they are receiving. And in that comic book, they are basically thanking the devil. That's where Marvel reveals their cultish background. But the Fantastic Four are allowing the youngest member of the family, the son of Reed Richards and Susan, he's basically thanking the devil for the food. Like I said, I'm going to see if that video is still up, and I'm going to put it in the description with that exact moment. That's where Marvel reveals pretty much their true alliance. So, like I said, back when the Fantastic Four were actually heroic, whenever Doctor Doom and Reed Richards would clash or collide, it always seems to me, or seemed to me, that Doctor Doom had a certain advantage over the Mr. Fantastic. Doctor Doom has no sort of worries. He doesn't care about the damage that he is going to cause as long as it fulfills a certain objective or method, or just like he reaches a goal. It's all about the means to an end. He looks at everything and everyone as a means to an end. Doctor Doom has shown some honor, some considerations towards certain antagonists and victims, but for the most part, when you compare him to Reed Richards, Doctor Doom, he's willing to go to do anything. He has no restrictions. And this is not the case for Mr. Fantastic. He's always thinking about, or he was in the when the Marvel comics were still good, he was thinking about the damage that he could cause. He was before he became the Illuminati and all of that. He's thinking about greater consequences to his actions. So he was always a bit at a disadvantage against Doctor Doom. And when it comes to Cugel, he shares that advantage with Doctor Doom. Cugel is willing and ready to sacrifice entire cities. He has let loose upon the dying earth catastrophic threats, catastrophic dangers, hazards, enemies, just so that he could accomplish a certain objective. And that's the strength of Cugel. But like I said, it doesn't mean that you could think that Cugel is a good person. But when it comes to moving in the dying earth, it's a sort of strength. The dying earth can seem quite infernal. For those of you that are not aware, in the dying earth, supposedly the sun is about to go out, the sun is about to die, and therefore if the sun dies, the earth dies as well, because the sun is the source of all life. The sun is amazing, really. I highly recommend that you, like I always said, take those how would you call it, sun baths or sun showers. Just stand under the sun, exposing your skin as much as you can. Don't believe those lies that you're going to get skin cancer. The real thing that gives you skin cancer is those lotions that you put on top. You need to little by little adjust yourself. If you don't believe me, just take a look here in YouTube at those Wim Hof videos where he's crossing the desert with no shirt, in shorts, and he is perfectly fine. So the human body is amazing as long as you don't put bad toxic substances and chemicals on it. Keep things as natural as possible. So back to the dying earth, like I said, the earth is dying, so everyone is kind of like desperate to take advantage of everyone, do everything that they can, no matter the cost. And Cugel is just trying to survive. There is this somewhat comical moment. I think I mentioned it where I talked about the dying earth in another video, where you have this place, and it's a sort of criticism towards the obsession with status and wealth. Basically, each family that is very wealthy, they erect these columns or pillars. And so the patriarch, the father of the family, he goes on top of each pillar, and he kind of like brags or shows off his wealth by having a very tall pillar. He basically just lies down at the top of it. He's drinking and eating and not doing anything at all. So those that want to surpass that level of wealth and richness and just like bon vivants, let's call it like that, or put it like that, they also pay for these huge pillars that should yes, like they are trying to surpass the height of the pillars of the other rich people. So Cugel takes advantage about this with another guy. They become partners in crime, and they start their business of building these pillars. But instead of building them higher and higher, they are just taking pieces through the use of some magic, if I remember correctly, taking pieces of the pillars, so that the highest pillars, they're actually making them shorter. And so instead of spending more like stone and work and all of that in making the pillars much bigger, they are basically removing. I don't remember if they were removing or they were making the pillars to sink so that they were shorter. So that way it looks like you made another pillar taller, but in fact you were making another pillar shorter. And when a woman tells him, one of the wives of those rich guys, tells him, "Oh, I think you are tricking us. That pillar doesn't seem to be taller than the last time I saw it." And Cugel, he, like I said, he kind of like gaslights that. "Oh no, you're mistaken. It is actually it's become because of certain circumstances, because of the angle that you are looking at things from the earth." I don't remember the sort of, like I say, wordplay that he used. Very ridiculous. And he tricks that woman into thinking that he is actually right and she must be mistaken, or she didn't notice it, or she had some sort of like she spaced out and she didn't notice that the pillar was actually getting larger and taller. And so he has a lot of moments like that. When it comes to survivability, that when he doesn't rely on his manipulation, Cugel really, like I mentioned in other videos, if you have a character that is a mountebank or a more focused on social situations, you need to get the best, the most powerful magical items at your disposal. In the case of Cugel, whenever he lays his eyes upon something that seems magical, he takes it and he is ready to use it when he needs it the most. Sometimes to some very ridiculous results, like I mentioned in my other video, when he found this sort of bracelet and there were certain buttons, but he didn't know how to use the bracelet. But every time someone like threatened him, like yes, they wouldn't do what he commanded, or they disrespected him in some way, he pressed one of the buttons and there was this like awful sound of groaning or some sort of dolorous moaning or something. Excuse me. So it turns out that that bracelet allowed you to control demons, but he didn't know how to use it. He was just like playing around with it, and somewhere, someplace, a demon felt that like a stimulation or a summon or something, but he didn't know how to call upon that demon. So Cugel is always gathering these sorts of magical apparatus, items, objects. Even if he doesn't know how they work, he's ready to use them to deceive others. And sometimes he actually gets lucky and he makes good use of those items. So if you're going to play as a character that is more like a mountebank, a trickster, or a deceiver, a con artist, an outright sociopath, sorry, or a gaslighter or whatever, you always need to secure that equipment. Now that I think about it, unless you are playing in a setting similar to the Dying Earth, if you are playing Cugel in any other setting, he's going to be pretty much a bad guy. Like I said, the only saving grace of Cugel in that setting is that everybody else, you find so many chaotic evil, lawful evil, neutral evil, and at the very least chaotic neutral people. There are some moments in the Dying Earth. The author Jack Vance never explains, or I don't think he ever explained, if those other stories happened before or after the period where Cugel was moving about. I got the idea that it happened before. It seems that the Earth was still somewhat virtuous. You see some very heroic individuals, and you see some failures, like what was the name? Candive the Beautiful. I forget the name of this other character. But you can, those that have read The Dying Earth, I can't believe I forgot about the name. He's like the prototype version of Cugel, but because, unlike Cugel, he went into some very dangerous situations that were more on the domain of Conan the Barbarian, situations that you would only survive if you were the epitome of the fighting man, at least as presented in Sword and Sorcery. He didn't have a good end. I think he was Candive. But in the case of Cugel, he immediately identifies where he is not physically capable of doing something. I don't think there is shame in avoiding situations where you simply know that you cannot win those situations physically. Although I think that should be That's an attitude that should be discouraged because you can end up being quite the coward. And sometimes you are not certain of what you are capable of unless you really put yourself into those situations. I can tell you, and probably a lot of you will agree, that as a man, sometimes you need to risk it, you need to take a gamble. And when you think something was impossible to achieve mentally or physically, sometimes you end up surprising yourself. So, in that regard, I think that's one of the weaknesses of Cugel. Like I said, time and again, he has shown that he's pretty decent when it comes to handling things physically. There were some times that I thought he could have done this or that, he could have killed that enemy, and instead he tried to negotiate things. He could have pretty much stabbed that enemy and make his escape. But I think that's also related to the quirky personality of Cugel. Even if there is a bit of risk, a tiny like a 10% or 5% chance that he is going to get injured, he is going to avoid that situation and take the con artist route. I think Cugel only takes a chance or a risk if he only notices like a 1% chance of overcoming a situation. So, overall, if you are thinking of creating a character like Cugel, you need that is more focused on his social expertise, diplomacy, or some con artist maneuvers. You need to focus on keeping the situations in the social battlefield. Even if you need to fight against something or someone, that's what I like of good role playing games, like, for example, in The Dark Eye, in the first adventure of The Dark Eye, the most recent edition. Even if you create a character that is focused completely, like I said, very little when it comes to combat skills or abilities, and you're more focused on social situations, you have that village nearby, that adventure, and you can convince others, persuade others, or perhaps, yes, hire people to carry out your more physical assaults. So if you have a character that is not very good at fighting, then get those allies, get those NPCs to help you. If you are a good character, let's say, try to find a situation where everyone is benefited somehow, that everyone ends up happy at the end. They all obtain some sort of reward from the operation or the, yes, like an endeavor or enterprise that you are trying to carry out. But if your character is more devilish, more evil, like I said, if Cugel was placed in, let's say, in Faerun or in Greyhawk or whatever, where there are some very heroic characters, then you will have to trick the other non-player characters in order for you to always get the upper hand or the greater rewards or little risks to your person, and the other ones will end up screwed. It's all about that. And definitely secure all of those items, weapons, artifacts, anything that can ensure that your character will survive if things go south, if they don't, if the situation is no longer a social challenge. Now it's all out war or all out combat. Those magical items will be the only things that will rescue you from certain defeat. And like I said, this is approaching the situation from a solo adventurer perspective. If you're with a party, the entire objective of creating a party or a group is so that every member of the party covers each other's weaknesses. But in the case of Cugel, just like Conan the Barbarian, although they are very different, they are all, both of them, they are still a one-man party archetype. Very different, but still each one of them, they can take on adventures on their own. They don't need anyone else at all. Or in the case of Cugel, he manipulates others so that he gets away with anything that he is attempting. And in the case of Conan, because Conan, as much as some people could look at Conan as if he's not actually a good guy, I actually think that Conan is a good guy just because he is the enemy of certain people doesn't mean that he's going to be bad to everyone. But he has rescued people, even sometimes adversaries, when he considers that some sort of injustice is going to be carried out. Conan is actually a good guy, in my opinion. He is a severe good guy. He is ready to kill anyone who crosses him. He doesn't take it from no one, but he's still, I would say, a pretty decent guy. So if when Conan actually relies on others, he does it on a term of actual allies, perhaps even friendship. But when it comes to Cugel, the non-player characters are going to be tools at your disposal if you are playing that particular sort of player character. Well, thank you. I hope you found this video entertaining and useful. If you have never tried to play as a mountebank or con artist, Cugel is the the example to follow. Although that sounds quite awful, but he actually is. So if you have any comments or questions or ideas, or maybe you thought about other characters that were similar to Cugel, please let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.